He's not even her real father. He's just the lab tech who ran the swab. Get this pathetic creep out of my sight." Piper's voice echoed off the high, vaulted oak panels of the Polk County Courthouse. The acoustics in the room were designed a century ago to make every word sound like a judgment from on high, and her voice cut through the dry, overheated air like a serrated blade. I was 33 years old. I was sitting at a heavy mahogany table that smelled faintly of lemon polish and decades of nervous sweat. I was wearing a cheap, poorly tailored navy suit I had bought at a thrift store on East 14th Street. The polyester blend was stiff, itching aggressively against the back of my neck, and the collar of my white shirt was slightly frayed at the edges. I had a purple bruise flowering along my jawline, a hideous mottled landscape of plum and sickly yellow that pulsed with a dull, rhythmic ache every time my heart beat. It was a souvenir from where her new boyfriend had shoved me down a flight of ice-slicked concrete steps 2 days earlier. The right side of my face was so swollen that my peripheral vision was partially obscured, and the faint metallic taste of healing blood still lingered on the back of my tongue. I had exactly 4 hours of sleep in my system, patched together in 15-minute intervals on a sagging motel mattress that smelled of stale cigarette smoke and mildew. Out in the hallway, muted but unmistakable through the heavy, brass-handled double doors, I could hear my 4-year-old daughter, Mila, crying. It wasn't a tantrum cry. It was the deep, ragged, hyperventilating sob of a terrified child. She wanted me. She wanted the man who had read her The Very Hungry Caterpillar every night since she was old enough to open her eyes. But the judge, a severe woman with silver hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful, was looking down at me from her elevated bench like I was something foul you scrape off the bottom of a winter boot. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a low, mocking hum, casting long, harsh shadows across the courtroom floor. 3 hours later, Piper was in handcuffs, and when the federal agents read out exactly what they had found on the encrypted drive, her face went the color of dead ash. The smug, untouchable arrogance drained from her features in real time, replaced by a hollow, wide-eyed terror. She had absolutely no idea it was all because of a blue dinosaur backpack. But to understand why watching her get shoved into the back of a black government vehicle, the heavy door slamming shut with a satisfying metallic thud, was the single most satisfying moment of my entire existence, you need to know how I ended up bleeding on the freezing courthouse steps in the first place. You need to understand the architecture of the lie she built around me. My name is Jude. I live in Des Moines, Iowa. I'm a guy who prefers quiet. I like predictable routines. I like the bitter, dark roast smell of cheap coffee burning on a hot plate at 5 in the morning, the sound of the percolator gurgling in the dark. I grew up in the foster system, bouncing between 6 different houses in Polk County before I turned 18. I remember the distinct smell of every single one of those houses. Boiled cabbage in the first, cat urine in the third, lemon pine sol masking the scent of cheap vodka in the fifth. When you grow up like that, constantly living out of garbage bags and cardboard boxes, you don't care about money or social status or taking big, flashy vacations to Cabo. You just want a table that doesn't wobble when you lean on it. You want a lock on your bedroom door. And most of all, you want people who don't pack your trash bags and leave them on the porch when they get tired of looking at you. My second foster dad, Arthur, was a quiet, hulking guy who worked as a night watchman at a massive lumber yard on the edge of town. He only kept me for 2 years before the state abruptly moved me again due to a funding technicality, but he gave me the only piece of advice that ever actually worked in the real world. He used to sit on his creaking wooden porch in the humid, mosquito-heavy Iowa summers, smoking these cheap, pungent cherry cigars that smelled like sweet decay. He'd point the glowing ember of his cigar at me and say, "Jude, listen to me. A liar builds a tall house. They build it fast, and they build it flashy. But a patient man owns the matches." I didn't understand what that meant when I was 14. I thought it was just old man nonsense. I understand it perfectly now. That one quote, echoing in my head through all the pain and the betrayal, is the reason I'm not rotting in a 6x8 jail cell right now, and the reason Mila is asleep in the next room, safe under her princess blankets, while I tell you this. I work as a DNA lab technician for the county. It sounds fancy to people who don't know any better. It's not. I work in a sterile, windowless cinder-block building off 8th Street, wearing a crinkling blue paper gown, latex gloves that make my hands sweat, and a plastic face shield. I run cheek swabs and blood samples through massive, humming thermal cyclers and sequencing machines all day. Paternity tests, ancestry kits, medical genetic markers, criminal forensics. It's a blue-collar job dressed up in a lab coat. But I like it because the machines don't lie. They don't manipulate you. They don't gaslight you or tell you that you're crazy. They just spit out the absolute, undeniable biological truth on a piece of curling thermal paper. I met Piper at a sprawling Hy-Vee grocery store on the west side of town. It was raining, one of those miserable, bone-chilling November freezing rains we get in Iowa, where the sky is the color of bruised iron and the wind cuts right through your coat. I was walking to my car when she dropped a massive glass jar of marinara sauce in the parking lot. It shattered against the wet asphalt, sending a spray of red sauce and glass shards across her expensive beige trench coat. She looked so helpless standing there in the freezing rain. I walked over, crouched down, and helped her clean it up, picking the jagged pieces of glass out of the red puddles. I gave her my umbrella. She was electric. That's the only word for it. When she thanked me, she talked fast, laughed loud, and had this chaotic, magnetic energy that pulled me right out of my quiet, insulated little life. Her perfume smelled like vanilla and expensive orchids. I was 28 years old. I had never really been in love. I had spent my 20s keeping my head down, studying, and surviving. I didn't know that chaotic energy is usually just a warning siren disguised as a personality. We started dating. 2 months in, she sat me down at a sticky vinyl booth in the Waveland Cafe. The diner smelled heavily of bacon grease and burnt toast. She wasn't touching her food. She was crying, wiping her eyes with a crumpled paper napkin, her mascara running slightly. "Piper, what's wrong?" I asked, leaning across the table. "You haven't touched your hash browns." She took a shaky breath. "I can't eat. I'm going to be sick. Jude, I'm pregnant." My heart did a strange, heavy stutter in my chest. "Okay," I said slowly. "Okay. Breathe. Is it... It's my ex's," she sobbed, burying her face in her hands. "It's his. He completely blocked my number when I told him. He moved to Chicago. I'm entirely alone, Jude. I don't know what to do." "You're not alone," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'm right here." "You don't understand," she wept, looking up at me with wide, terrified eyes. "I can't do this by myself. I'm terrified. I don't have any money saved. I'm a mess." I didn't run. I didn't even flinch. I felt like a knight, I thought to myself at the time. I finally have a purpose. Someone actually needs me. I reached across the table, pushed aside her plate of half-eaten food, and took her trembling, manicured hand in both of mine. "I told you I'm not going anywhere," I said, squeezing her fingers. "We will figure this out together. I have a good job. I'll take care of you. Both of you." When Mila was born, I was the one holding Piper's leg in the freezing delivery room. I was the one who cut the thick, rubbery umbilical cord. I was the one who stayed awake for 3 straight days, surviving on vending machine coffee and stale crackers, rocking that tiny, squalling little girl in an uncomfortable plastic hospital chair while Piper slept. When they handed me the paperwork, I didn't hesitate. I signed the birth certificate with a pen that felt heavier than a hammer. As far as the state of Iowa was concerned, and as far as my expanding heart was concerned, she was mine. We got married a year later in a small courthouse ceremony. We bought a modest 2-bedroom ranch house near the river, with a fenced-in backyard and a large oak tree in the front. I worked my long shifts at the lab, coming home smelling of sterile alcohol wipes. Piper worked part-time as an office manager for her older brother Wyatt's construction company. Those first 3 years were good. At least, the illusion of them was good. I have memories that still feel like they belong to someone else, a movie I watched a long time ago. Mila learning to walk on our cheap beige carpet, her little hands gripping the edge of the coffee table. Mila mispronouncing the word spaghetti as paschetti, her face covered in red sauce. Piper laughing brightly as we chased our golden retriever mix around the backyard in the autumn leaves. God, we were happy. I was so incredibly happy. And I had absolutely no idea what she was doing behind my back every single one of those days. Looking back, the warning signs weren't just red flags. They were a parade of sirens. I just chose to wear a heavy, self-imposed blindfold because the alternative was returning to the lonely, quiet life I had before them. The first sign was the phone. Piper always had her smartphone face down on the counter, the table, the arm of the couch. If I walked into the kitchen while she was typing, she would lock the screen so fast she almost dropped the device on the linoleum. I finally asked her about it once, while I was standing at the sink, washing a sink full of greasy dishes. The water was hot, scalding my hands through the yellow rubber gloves. "Why do you always hide your screen when I walk in?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light and conversational over the sound of the running water. She stiffened. She rolled her eyes, a sharp, practiced movement. She had this specific, deeply condescending way of rolling her eyes that made you feel like you were the stupidest, most paranoid person on earth. "I'm not hiding it, Jude," she sighed heavily. "I'm planning a surprise for Wyatt's birthday." "It just feels like you jump every time I enter a room," I pushed, turning off the faucet. "Are you okay? You seem on edge." "I'm fine," she snapped. "You're the one making it weird. Why are you always sneaking up on me?" "I wasn't sneaking, Piper. I was just coming in to wash the dishes." "Well, thanks for ruining the surprise," she said, snatching the phone off the counter and crossing her arms. "You always have to make everything a conspiracy. It's exhausting living with someone who constantly interrogates me." I'm suffocating her, I thought, a knot of guilt tightening in my stomach. I'm letting my foster care abandonment issues ruin my marriage. "I'm sorry," I said quietly, looking down at the suds in the sink. "I didn't mean to pry. I trust you." I actually apologized to her. Then came the late nights. She started working late at Wyatt's cramped, dusty construction office downtown. She claimed they were suddenly landing huge, complex government contracts, and the sheer volume of compliance paperwork was drowning them. She would come home at 10 or 11 at night. She would walk through the front door, the cold night air clinging to her clothes, smelling heavily of expensive gin and a sharp, musky bergamot cologne that definitely wasn't mine. Her skin was always cold to the touch. "Where have you been?" I asked one night, looking up from the couch where I was folding Mila's laundry. "It's almost midnight." "Wyatt took the new clients out to dinner at 801 Chop House," she told me, tossing her heavy wool coat onto the armchair with an exhausted groan. "I had to sit there with my laptop and take notes while they drank scotch for 4 hours. It was miserable." "You smell like a distillery," I noted, trying to mask my unease. "Because I was sitting next to a bunch of drunk contractors," she snapped, kicking off her heels. "Do you want to do my job, Jude? Because you're welcome to it. God, I just want to go to sleep." That specific detail right there, the laptop and the notes, remember it. It becomes incredibly important later. The fracture, the agonizing moment the glass of our marriage actually cracked and splintered, happened on Mila's 3rd birthday. We were having a small, chaotic party at the house. Just a few neighbors, Wyatt, and some of Piper's friends. The living room was littered with wrapping paper and plastic toys. Wyatt brought his new business partner, a guy named Sterling. Sterling was a local commercial real estate developer who had recently, and very loudly, decided to run for city council. He drove a pristine black Porsche 911 that he parked diagonally across my driveway. He wore tailored Italian suits that cost more than my entire car, and he had a slick, practiced, predatory smile that instinctively made you want to check your pockets to make sure your wallet was still there. He smelled strongly of peppermint and wealth. During the peak of the party, I was alone in the kitchen, carefully cutting a grocery store sheet cake. The frosting was thick and sugary. I happened to glance out the window into the backyard. Piper and Sterling were standing by the wooden fence, far away from the rest of the guests. They weren't just talking. They were standing deep in each other's personal space, the kind of proximity that hums with electricity. Sterling reached out, his expensive watch glinting in the autumn sun, and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind Piper's ear. His fingers lingered on her jawline, Piper didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She leaned into his hand. She looked up at him and smiled. It was a soft, glowing, intimate smile that I hadn't seen directed at me in over a year. My stomach dropped into a bottomless gorge. The heavy steel cake knife I was holding suddenly felt like it weighed 50 pounds. My hand started to tremble so badly I had to set the knife down on the counter. My throat closed up. When the sun went down and everyone finally left, the house was devastatingly quiet. I confronted her in the kitchen. I kept my voice to a harsh, constrained whisper because Mila was asleep down the hall. "What exactly is going on with you and Sterling?" I asked, my heart hammering against my ribs. Piper was casually wiping down the granite counter with a wet sponge. She didn't even stop moving. She didn't look up at me. "Nothing. He's Wyatt's partner. He's helping us secure a massive city contract for the new housing development. He was touching your hair, Piper. I saw it from the window." She froze. She slammed the wet sponge down into the stainless steel sink with a loud, wet smack. "Oh my God, Jude. Are you really doing this right now? On our daughter's birthday?" she hissed, finally turning to glare at me. "It wasn't a professional touch," I pushed back, stepping closer. You leaned into his hand. You smiled at him. "He was brushing a mosquito off my neck," she shot back, her voice dripping with venom. "You are so unbelievably insecure, it's suffocating. You see shadows everywhere." "A mosquito?" "Piper, it's 45 degrees outside. There are no bugs." "Are you calling me a liar?" she demanded, stepping right up into my face. "Are you honestly accusing me of something in my own home? No wonder I hate being in this house. You drain the absolute life out of me with your pathetic paranoia." She shoved past me, walked down the hall into the master bedroom, and slammed the door. I heard the heavy click of the lock. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the silence ringing in my ears. I slept on the lumpy couch that night. I stared at the ceiling and told myself it was nothing. I told myself I was overreacting. But it wasn't nothing. The escalation started slowly, a creeping rot in the foundation of our life. And then it became a devastating avalanche. It began with open, public disrespect. Small, cutting comments designed to humiliate me in front of other people. 2 weeks after the birthday party, we were at a neighborhood barbecue next door. The air smelled of burning charcoal and cheap hot dogs. I was standing on the lawn, talking to the guy next door about spark plugs for lawnmowers. Piper walked up, interrupting the conversation without a word of apology. She shoved her empty plastic red cup into my chest. "Jude, be a good boy and get me another drink," she commanded loudly. "And try not to trip on the way to the cooler this time." The neighbor stopped talking. He looked down at his shoes, visibly uncomfortable. "It's fine," I mumbled, my face burning with embarrassment. "What are you drinking, Piper?" "Vodka soda," she said dismissively. "And use fresh ice, not the dirty stuff at the bottom." The neighbor coughed. "I can grab it, Piper. I'm heading that way to the grill anyway." "No, let him do it," Piper laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. She looked at the neighbor, treating me like I wasn't even there. "I have to give him simple instructions to keep him occupied. He just plays with spit samples all day in a basement. He's not used to complex tasks." I swallowed the hot, rising bile of anger in my throat. I squeezed the plastic cup until it cracked slightly in my grip. I went and got the drink. I did it because Milo was playing in the sprinkler 10 feet away, shrieking with joy, and I didn't want to start a screaming match that would ruin her afternoon. Then came the financial control. Piper abruptly changed the password to our joint checking account. When my debit card declined at a gas station and I asked her why, she didn't even look up from her magazine. "There had been some fraudulent charges," she said smoothly. "The bank required a total security reset." "Okay," I said. "What's the new password? I need to pay the electric bill." "I'll handle the finances from now on," she said, flipping a glossy page. "You're terrible at budgeting anyway, Jude. You spend too much on groceries." I stood there stunned. I had been paying all our bills, the mortgage, the utilities, out of my modest lab tech paycheck for 4 straight years. But the real soul-crushing violation was spatial. Sterling started coming to the house. He didn't wait for invitations. He would just show up at 6 in the evening. He wouldn't even knock on the front door. He would just turn the knob and walk right through the entryway, wearing his immaculate tailored suits, acting like he held the deed to the property. "Wyatt sent me over to go over some complicated blueprints with Piper," he would say, casually tossing his leather briefcase onto my armchair, barely even glancing in my direction. They would sit together at my dining room table for hours. I would be exiled to the living room floor, sitting on the rug, silently building wooden blocks with Mila. Over the sound of the television, I could hear them whispering. I could hear Piper giggling softly, a sound she never made around me anymore. The smell of his peppermint cologne filled the entire house, drowning out the smell of the dinner I had cooked. If I got up and walked into the dining room just to get a glass of water from the kitchen, they would instantly go dead silent. Sterling would lean back in his chair and look at me with this dead, flat, reptilian stare. He would stare at me until I felt so uncomfortable I left the room. I was rapidly becoming a ghost in my own home. I was being erased. And then came the Tuesday evening that pushed the escalation to the breaking point. It was a dinner scene that finally shattered my illusion of control. Sterling had shown up unannounced again. It was pouring rain outside. He and Piper were sitting at the kitchen island. They had ordered expensive sushi from a place downtown. The sleek black plastic containers were spread out across the granite. I walked into the kitchen after putting a load of laundry in the wash. There were only 2 sets of chopsticks. "This spicy tuna is incredible," Sterling was saying, leaning close to her. "You have to try this piece, Piper." Piper moaned, closing her eyes as she chewed. "God, that's so good. Oh, hey, Jude, there's some leftover dry meatloaf in the fridge if you're hungry. We didn't think you liked sushi." "I like sushi fine," I said, my voice tight. "But that's not what I want to talk about right now. Piper, we need to discuss Mila's preschool enrollment. The deadline for the public pre-K lottery is on Friday." Piper dabbed her mouth with a napkin. "Sterling and I actually already talked about it this afternoon. We're looking at Oak Ridge Academy." I stared at her. Oak Ridge? "Piper, that's a private academy. That's $20,000 a year. We can't afford that." Sterling smirked, a slow, oily smile spreading across his face. He picked up his water glass. "Don't worry about the money, Jude. I'm going to sponsor her tuition. Consider it a long-term investment in my favorite honorary niece." "Absolutely not," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "She's my daughter. I pay for her schooling. We aren't taking your money." Piper slammed her hand down on the counter, rattling the plates. "With what money, Jude? Your pathetic lab tech salary? Don't let your fragile, wounded ego ruin Mila's future. Sterling is being incredibly generous. You should be down on your knees saying thank you." My hands gripped the edge of the counter so hard my knuckles popped. I thought I was going to be sick. I was being systematically replaced, emasculated in my own kitchen by a man who bought his way into my living room. I didn't say another word. I turned around and walked out, the sound of Sterling's soft chuckle following me down the hall. And then came the moment that finally broke the world wide open. It was mid-November, the exact anniversary of the rainy day Piper and I met in that grocery store parking lot. Mila had come down with a sudden, viciously bad fever. She was lethargic, her skin burning hot to the touch. We rushed her to the pediatrician's office. The waiting room smelled of sterile wipes and old magazines. The doctor, an older, gentle man, examined her. He was deeply concerned about a weird, butterfly-shaped rash spreading across Mila's forearms. He ordered an immediate blood panel. He explained they needed to check for a specific rare genetic marker that indicated a severe autoimmune issue. "Does anyone in your family have a history of lupus or similar autoimmune disorders?" the doctor asked, looking between us with his pen poised over the chart. "No," I said instantly. "Nothing like that on my side." The doctor turned to Piper. "What about maternal history, Mrs. Vance?" Piper hesitated. For a split second, a look of genuine panic flashed behind her eyes. She looked down at the linoleum floor. I don't know about my dad's side," she stammered. "We aren't close. I don't have those records." The doctor frowned slightly. "We'll run the blood panel on Mila. But it would be incredibly helpful if you both got tested for the specific marker as well, just so we know exactly what genetic baseline we're dealing with. I can do that, I volunteered quickly. I work at the county DNA lab. I have full clearance. I'll run my own swab and Piper's swab at work tomorrow morning and fax the results directly to your office. That would be perfect, the doctor smiled. It will save you a massive out-of-pocket hospital bill for the genetic sequencing. Piper swallowed hard. Is that really necessary? She just has a fever and a rash. It seems excessive. It's for Mila, Piper, I said firmly, looking her in the eye. I'll bring the sterile swabs home tonight. The next morning, I took the sealed plastic tubes containing the cotton swabs to my lab. The fluorescent lights hummed aggressively above me, casting a sickly greenish pallor over the stainless steel workstations. The air smelled of bleach and ozone. I prepped the samples with practiced mechanical efficiency. I ran Piper's swab through the extractor. I ran my swab. And just out of pure habit, because the massive sequencing machine was already calibrated and running, I ran a comparative analysis between my sample and the digital blood sample data the hospital had securely emailed over for Mila. I wasn't looking for paternity. I wasn't that paranoid. I already knew I wasn't her biological father. Piper had tearfully confessed she was pregnant by her phantom ex before we ever went on our third date. I had accepted that reality years ago. I was only looking at the specific autoimmune genetic markers. The heavy machine whirred, clicking through its cycles. Finally, the results printed out on the crisp, curling thermal paper. I pulled the sheet free and stared at the columns of numbers. Mila didn't just lack my DNA. That was entirely expected. Mila lacked Piper's DNA. I blinked. My vision blurred for a second. I rubbed my eyes hard with the heel of my hand and looked at the paper again. The ambient, droning hum of the lab equipment seemed to slowly fade away into total silence. A rushing sound, like ocean waves, roared in my ears. My mouth went bone dry. 0% maternal match. That was impossible. It was medically, physically impossible. I was in the room when Mila was born. I watched the doctor pull her out. I cut the cord. Panic seized me. I frantically spun around in my rolling chair and pulled up the raw data on the main computer terminal. I checked the barcodes. I checked the sample logs. I checked the calibration settings. I thought I had cross-contaminated the plates. Then the realization hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. I pulled up the specific data for Piper's sample. The swab she had personally handed to me that morning in the kitchen, sealed in the plastic tube. It wasn't human DNA. The sequencing software had flagged it with a bright red error code. It was canine DNA. Piper had secretly swabbed the inside of our golden retriever's mouth and handed the tube to me with a straight face. Why would she do that? The thought screamed in my head, echoing in the empty lab. Why would she actively, intentionally prevent me from seeing her genetic markers? What is she hiding? My fingers were trembling so violently I could barely type. I dug deeper into the county database. I broke strict federal protocol. I searched Piper's maiden name, Piper Vance, in the comprehensive statewide medical registry we had emergency access to. I scrolled through years of records until I found it. A surgical medical record from 6 years ago. 2 full years before I ever met her in that Hy-Vee parking lot. Piper had undergone a full radical hysterectomy due to severe, life-threatening endometriosis. She couldn't have children. She hadn't been pregnant when I met her. She physically lacked the organs to carry a child. My hands shook uncontrollably. The sterile, temperature-controlled air in the lab suddenly felt too thin, too hot to breathe. I was suffocating. I pulled up Mila's official birth certificate on the county portal. Piper's name was printed clearly under Mother. My name was printed under Father. I spent the next 3 hours locked in a private supply closet, sitting on a box of latex gloves, making frantic, hushed phone calls. I called the private clinic where Mila was born. I used my lab credentials and pretended to be updating insurance compliance records. I cross-referenced dates, names, and attending physicians. By noon, the horrifying, monstrous puzzle pieces snapped together. I had the absolute truth. Piper hadn't given birth to Mila. Mila was her older brother Wyatt's biological child. Wyatt had gotten a young, desperate girl pregnant. The girl was a severe drug addict who wanted absolutely nothing to do with the baby and vanished after the birth. Wyatt, a selfish, arrogant man, didn't want the burden of a kid either. So Piper had engineered a masterpiece of a con. She had faked an entire 9-month pregnancy. She had bought a realistic silicone fake belly online. She had specifically targeted me, a quiet, lonely guy with a stable county job, good benefits, and a desperate, pathetic foster kid need for a real family, to be the ultimate provider. When the time came for the delivery, they coordinated with a corrupt, gambling-addicted doctor at a private clinic who owed Sterling a massive amount of money. They forged the hospital intake records. They forged the birth certificate. They handed me Wyatt's abandoned baby in a swaddle and let me believe with all my heart that I was stepping up to be a hero for a terrified woman in need. For 4 years, I had been raising Piper's niece, and Piper had been using me as a free, live-in nanny and an ATM to fund her life while she carried on an affair with Sterling. I left work early. I didn't tell my supervisor. I just walked out into the cold air. I drove home in a sickening daze, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The sky over Des Moines was bruised, heavy and gray, threatening a massive snowstorm. I unlocked my front door and walked into my house. The heat was cranked up. Piper was sitting casually on the living room couch, wearing a silk robe, drinking a glass of expensive red wine. Sterling was sitting right next to her, wearing his tailored trousers and a dress shirt. His hand was resting intimately high up on her bare thigh. They didn't even jump or pull apart when I walked in. Sterling just looked over his shoulder and smirked at me. "You're home early," Piper said flatly, taking a slow sip of her wine. I walked over to the glass coffee table. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I threw the crumpled printed lab results down onto the glass. "You swabbed the dog, Piper," I said. My voice was eerily, terrifyingly calm. It didn't even sound like my own voice. "And you don't have a uterus." Piper slowly lowered her wine glass. She looked down at the thermal papers scattered on the table. She didn't panic. She didn't cry. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She laughed. It was a cold, sharp, echoing sound that scraped against the drywall of the living room like a rusty nail. "I honestly wondered when you'd finally figure it out," she said, a cruel smile spreading across her face. She leaned back against the plush cushions, completely relaxed. "You're supposed to be this brilliant, detail-oriented lab tech, Jude. But it took you 4 entire years to realize you've been working double shifts to fund my brother's drunken mistake." "You lied to me," I whispered, the crushing weight of the betrayal making my knees weak. "Every single day. You let me hold her in the hospital. You let me think." "I let you think you were a big, strong hero," she snapped, dropping the smile, her eyes turning hard and dead. "You were pathetic, Jude. You were so desperate for a family because nobody ever wanted you in foster care. I saw you coming a mile away. I gave you exactly what you wanted. A cute little girl to play house with and read stories to. You should be down on your knees thanking me." Sterling stood up smoothly. He casually buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "All right, the fun's over. The gig is up. Pack a bag, Jude. You're leaving." I stared at him, my fists clenching at my sides. "This is my house. I pay the mortgage. My name is on the deed." "Actually," Sterling said, reaching into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulling out a sharply folded piece of legal paper. "Piper transferred the deed to Wyatt's Shell LLC 3 weeks ago. You signed the notary paperwork yourself. Remember that massive stack of mortgage refinancing documents she had you sign while you were distracted watching the football game?" My blood ran ice cold. I had signed them. I had trusted her blindly. "You're trespassing," Piper said, pulling out her smartphone. "And if you don't turn around and leave right now, I'm going to call the police. Show them this bruise I got from bumping into the counter yesterday and tell them you hit me in a drunken rage." "I'm not leaving without Mila," I said, stepping forward, my heart pounding in my ears. "I'll take this to court. I'll expose all of you." Sterling moved incredibly fast. For a guy who sat in an office all day in tailored suits, he was heavy and surprisingly strong. He stepped forward and shoved me hard in the center of my chest with both hands. I stumbled backward, off balance, my heavy work boots catching the thick edge of the living room rug, and I went down hard, crashing into the entryway table. "You have absolutely no legal right to that kid," Sterling sneered, standing over me, looking down at me like an insect. "She's not yours biologically. The birth certificate is a proven fraudulent document, which my high-priced lawyers will happily prove in family court. You're nothing to her. You have zero rights. You're just a creepy roommate who severely overstayed his welcome." Piper walked over, her silk robe flowing, and opened the front door. The freezing, biting November wind howled into the warm living room. Snow had already started to fall, swirling in the yellow porch light. "Get out, Jude," she said. I didn't move. I pushed myself up onto my elbows and looked down the dark hallway. Mila's bedroom door was closed. She was taking her afternoon nap. She was in there with her dinosaur stuffed animals, completely unaware that her entire world was being dismantled. "I will fight you," I said, my voice shaking with a deep, volcanic rage I didn't know I possessed. "I will burn this entire thing to the ground. I promise you." Piper didn't blink. She dialed 911. She put the phone on speaker and held it up. 911. "What is your emergency?" The dispatcher's voice crackled. "Help," Piper said, instantly forcing her voice to tremble perfectly, tears magically springing to her eyes. My husband is having a psychotic break. He's screaming. He just pushed my friend. He's threatening to burn the house down. Please, we have a small child in the house. Send officers quickly." 10 agonizing minutes later, 2 Des Moines police officers were standing in my living room, their boots tracking snow onto the hardwood floor. Piper was crying hysterically, producing very real, very convincing tears, showing them a red mark on her arm that she must have violently pinched into her own skin while I was waiting for them to arrive. Sterling played the calm, concerned family friend perfectly, hands in his pockets, shaking his head sadly. The officers looked at me. I was shaking with adrenaline. I tried to explain the forged birth certificate, the dog DNA, the LLC property transfer, the 4-year con. The words spilled out of my mouth in a frantic, disjointed rush. I sounded like a complete raving lunatic. "Sir, you need to step outside," the older officer said firmly, putting a heavy hand on his utility belt, right next to his taser. "Officer, listen to me," I pleaded. "It's my house. That's my daughter asleep down the hall. Sir, she has visible marks, and she has asked you to leave the premises. If you don't step outside right now, I will arrest you for domestic disturbance and you'll spend the weekend in lockup." I had no choice. I looked down the hallway one last time, my heart shattering into a million jagged pieces. I walked out the door. I didn't have a winter coat. I didn't have my wallet. I just had my car keys and my cell phone in my pocket. As I walked down the icy wooden porch steps, Sterling stepped out onto the porch behind me. The officers were inside the kitchen, taking Piper's statement. Sterling looked down at me from the top of the stairs, the freezing wind whipping his tie over his shoulder. "Don't ever come back here, you pathetic loser," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with malice. And then, with a swift, brutal motion, he planted his expensive, hard leather shoe squarely in the center of my chest and kicked me backward down the remaining 4 concrete steps. I fell through the air. I hit the icy concrete walkway incredibly hard. The side of my jaw smacked violently against the frozen pavement. A blinding flash of white pain exploded through the right side of my face. My teeth clacked together, and I bit the inside of my cheek. Sterling calmly turned around, walked back inside, and locked the heavy front door. I laid there in the snow for 5 full minutes. The biting cold seeped through my thin flannel shirt, numbing my skin. I tasted hot, metallic copper in my mouth. My jaw throbbed with a sickening rhythm. I didn't cry. I didn't scream into the night. I just laid there on the ice, watching the large snowflakes drift down through the yellow glow of the porch light, listening to the wind rattle the bare branches of the oak tree. And then, as I stared up at the dark sky, I remembered the smell of cherry cigars. I remembered what my foster dad Arthur told me on that humid porch all those years ago. A liar builds a tall house, but a patient man owns the matches. I slowly pushed myself up off the ice. My joints ached. I got in my freezing, beat-up sedan. The engine struggled to turn over, but it finally caught. I drove blindly through the snowstorm to a cheap, run-down motel on Merle Hay Road. The neon sign outside buzzed and flickered. I paid for 2 nights with the crumpled emergency cash I always kept hidden in my glove box. I sat heavily on the edge of the lumpy, squeaking mattress. The room smelled of bleach and despair. I looked at myself in the cracked bathroom mirror. My jaw was already swelling, turning a dark, angry purple. I looked like a corpse. I was 33 years old. I had no house. I had no money. The woman I loved had used me as an oblivious prop in a 4-year sociopathic con. And the little girl I had raised from birth, the only family I had ever truly known, was currently sleeping in a house with a violent monster. If I could go back in time to that exact moment, sitting in that depressing motel room, I would tell myself to run, to drive across state lines and never look back. But I didn't, because I grew up with nothing, and I don't give up on the people I love. And that strictly includes never giving up on making the people who hurt them pay. Over the next 2 brutal months, Piper and Sterling unleashed a legal and psychological hell on me. Piper filed a vicious temporary restraining order, claiming to a judge that I was stalking her and threatening her life. She used the fact that I had parked my car down the street from Mila's daycare just to catch a glimpse of her playing on the playground as undeniable proof of my dangerous obsession. The judge, swayed by Piper's tears, granted it immediately. I legally couldn't go within 500 feet of my own daughter. Wyatt called me once from a blocked, untraceable number while I was sitting in the motel. "Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic little lab rat," Wyatt sneered through the phone, the sound of a sports game blaring in the background. "Mila is my blood. Piper is my blood. You're absolutely nothing. You're a ghost. If you try to fight this in court, Sterling will use his connections to make sure you lose your county job, your car, and your freedom. We'll bury you in legal fees until you break. Move on." I didn't say a word. I just listened to him breathe, and then I hung up the phone. They thought I was broken. They thought I was hiding in my cheap, drafty apartment, drinking myself to sleep every night, weeping over pictures of Mila. They had absolutely no idea what I was actually doing in the dark. What nobody in that house knew was that I hadn't just left the property completely empty-handed on the night they violently kicked me out. 3 months prior to the blowout, Piper and I had gotten into a massive, screaming argument about the garage being messy. In a sudden, theatrical fit of rage, she had stomped into the garage, grabbed a heavy cardboard box full of Wyatt's old, discarded office electronics that had been sitting forgotten on my workbench, and hurled it forcefully into the concrete driveway. "Throw it all away!" she had screamed, her face red. "It's all garbage, just like everything else in this house." After she stormed back inside, I had quietly walked out to pick up the box to put it in the trash bin. But a small, surprisingly heavy black rectangular object had spilled out of the ripped cardboard onto the concrete. It was a Samsung solid-state external hard drive. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just old blueprints. I wiped the dirt off it, tossed it carelessly into the bottom of my canvas tool bag in the trunk of my car, and completely forgot about it. Until that first agonizing night in the motel room, staring at my bruised face in the mirror. I remembered Piper's exact words from a year ago, when she came home smelling of gin. Wyatt took the new clients out to dinner. I had to sit there with my laptop and take notes while they drank. Piper didn't take notes on paper. She despised writing by hand. She always had her laptop. And Wyatt wasn't a tech guy. He could barely operate a smartphone. If Wyatt needed highly sensitive financial records kept far away off the main company server, he would absolutely make Piper do the data entry. I ran out to my car in the freezing snow. I popped the frozen trunk. I dug frantically through the ice scraper and jumper cables until I found the canvas tool bag. I unzipped it. The hard drive was still sitting there at the bottom, cold as a stone. The next morning, I bought a cheap, refurbished laptop from a dingy pawn shop downtown using the last of my cash. I sat at the small laminate desk in the motel room. I plugged the USB cable into the drive. A password prompt instantly popped up on the screen. It was encrypted. Heavy, commercial-grade encryption software. A normal, rational person would have given up right then. A normal person would have tried to hire a professional hacker and paid thousands of dollars they didn't have. I didn't need a hacker. I didn't need software. I needed human memory. I needed to understand the psychology of the woman who had manipulated me. Piper was incredibly, dangerously arrogant, but she was also incredibly lazy when it came to details that didn't directly benefit her appearance. She constantly reused passwords. On our very first date at the Waveland Cafe, we had talked about our childhoods over coffee. She had told me about her first dog, a golden retriever named Barnaby that she loved more than anything in the world, and she proudly told me she was crowned the high school prom queen in 2008. Barnaby08. She used it for her Netflix account, her personal bank login, her email. I typed it into the blinking encryption prompt. Access denied. I frowned. The blue light of the screen illuminated my swollen jaw. I tried Barnaby 2008. Access denied. I sat back in the creaking plastic chair. I closed my eyes. I thought about the exact way Piper spoke, the way she always desperately needed to feel superior to everyone in the room, the way she mocked people she deemed beneath her. What phrase would she use to lock down a secret drive holding illegal, highly sensitive business records? I remembered a cruel joke she made in the kitchen about Wyatt's investors. She called them dumb money. I typed, dumb money 08, access denied. I spent 3 grueling days in that motel room trying variations. I didn't sleep. My eyes burned. I ate cold, salty canned soup straight from the tin. I kept trying. I tried combinations of Sterling's name, Wyatt's name, street addresses. On the 4th night, exhausted and hallucinating from lack of sleep, I remembered the exact day Wyatt proudly announced he had started his new shell company with Sterling. It was April 14th. I typed, Sterling Wyatt 0414, access denied. Then, a cold, sharp realization hit me like a splash of ice water. Piper didn't truly care about Wyatt. She certainly didn't care about Sterling, not beyond his money. She only cared about herself. Her narcissism was the core of her entire being. I typed her absolute favorite phrase, the arrogant thing she said to me every single time I ever dared to question her judgment. Always. Right. I hit enter. The little spinning progress bar appeared. The drive whirred softly on the desk. Access granted. The drive opened, flooding the screen with neatly organized file folders. It wasn't just a few scattered ledgers. It was the entire massive shadow accounting system for Wyatt and Sterling's criminal enterprise. Sterling was currently running for city council on a highly publicized platform of community development and revitalization. He had successfully secured millions in state and federal grants to build affordable housing for low-income families in Des Moines. The meticulous Excel spreadsheets on the drive showed exactly where that grant money was actually going. They weren't building any houses. The construction sites were empty dirt lots. They were illegally funneling the federal grant money directly into Wyatt's dozens of fake shell LLCs, including the one that now held the deed to my house. And from there, the money was being quietly wired to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. I clicked through the directories until I found a specific folder labeled P_S_draws, Piper and Sterling. Inside was a shockingly detailed ledger showing exactly how much they had personally skimmed from a massive grant meant for a new children's hospital wing. $456,000. It was an odd number, a highly specific number, a devastatingly illegal number. They had stolen almost $500,000 from a charity fund meant for sick kids, using it to secretly finance Sterling's political campaign and fund Piper's new, lavish lifestyle. And Piper, in her infinite paranoid wisdom, had kept meticulous date-stamped notes on every single wire transfer, probably keeping it as blackmail collateral in case Sterling ever tried to screw her over and leave her behind. I stared at the screen. The harsh blue light washed over my bruised face in the dark motel room. I felt a slow, cold smile spread across my lips. I didn't call a lawyer. Lawyers cost a fortune, and they operate within a slow, bureaucratic civil system that a man like Sterling could easily manipulate and stall for years. I picked up my phone and called the FBI field office in downtown Des Moines. I didn't use my real name. I just calmly asked the receptionist to speak to a senior agent in the Financial Crimes Division. 2 days later, I sat in a cracked vinyl booth at a rundown, greasy spoon diner on the industrial edge of town. The rain was lashing aggressively against the dirty plate glass windows. The smell of old fryer grease and burnt coffee hung in the air. A man in a cheap, rumpled gray suit slid into the booth across from me. He introduced himself as Agent Rusk. He looked incredibly tired, his eyes framed by deep, dark bags. He signaled the waitress and ordered black coffee. I didn't give him a dramatic, cinematic speech. I didn't act like a movie star. I just reached into my pocket and slid a cheap plastic USB flash drive across the sticky, syrup-stained table. I had carefully copied the entire unencrypted contents of the Samsung hard drive onto it. "What's this?" Rusk asked, eyeing the plastic drive suspiciously without touching it. "That's a city council candidate named Sterling, a local contractor named Wyatt, and a woman named Piper," I said, my voice steady. "And it's undeniable digital proof of $456,000 in federal grant fraud. It has the wire transfers, the bank routing numbers, the dates, the times, and the IP addresses." Rusk finally reached out and picked up the drive, rolling it between his fingers. He looked at me with sharp, calculating eyes. "People don't usually hand over $500,000 in felony fraud evidence with their morning eggs. Why are you giving me this? What's your angle?" "Because they took my daughter," I said. Rusk sighed, leaning back against the vinyl. "This sounds like a messy domestic dispute, Mr. Jude. The FBI doesn't handle local family court custody battles. You need a divorce attorney." "I'm not asking you to handle my custody battle," I said, leaning forward. "I'm asking you to look at the offshore wire transfers in the folder labeled Draws. If I'm lying, you can arrest me for wasting federal time. But if I'm right, you get the biggest political collar of your career right before an election." Rusk looked at me for a long, silent time. He slipped the drive into his suit pocket. "Federal investigations take time, Mr. Jude. We have to verify everything. We have to build a bulletproof case." "I know," I said, taking a sip of my water. "And I have all the time in the world." That diner meeting was in December. For the next 2 agonizing months, I played the pathetic, broken victim to perfection. I showed up to every single mandatory family court hearing looking utterly defeated. I wore my wrinkled thrift store suit. I let Piper's expensive, aggressive lawyer berate me in front of the judge. I let them paint a vivid picture of me as a deranged, obsessive, unstable ex-boyfriend who was terrifyingly clinging to a child that biologically wasn't his. I didn't fight back. I didn't raise my voice. I just sat quietly at the defendant's table, taking meticulous notes on a yellow legal pad, keeping my head bowed. And every single time I looked weak, Piper got more confident. Her arrogance swelled. She thought she had completely destroyed me. By late February, the final decisive custody hearing arrived. This was the big one. This was the hearing where the judge was going to officially sever my parental rights, legally invalidate the forged birth certificate, and grant sole, permanent legal custody to Piper, and by extension, to Sterling, who was sitting smugly in the gallery. The courtroom was freezing cold. The heavy oak benches creaked loudly as people shifted their weight. The air smelled of floor wax and tension. Piper sat confidently at the plaintiff's table. She wore a pristine, tailored white blazer that probably cost $1,000. Her hair was perfectly blown out, cascading over her shoulders. Sterling sat in the gallery right behind her, wearing a navy pinstripe suit, casually scrolling through emails on his phone, utterly bored by the proceedings. Wyatt was sitting next to him, chewing gum loudly. Mila was out in the hallway with a court-appointed social worker. I had caught a brief, heartbreaking glimpse of her when I walked through the double doors. She was wearing her favorite blue dinosaur backpack, the exact one I had bought for her first day of preschool. When she saw me, her little face had lit up and she yelled, "Daddy!" I couldn't even hug her. The heavy-set bailiff had immediately stepped between us, putting a hand on my chest, reminding me of the restraining order. Now, we were deep into the hearing. Piper was sitting up on the elevated witness stand. Her expensive lawyer was pacing in front of her, feeding her practiced questions. "And did the defendant, Jude, know that he was not the biological father of the child?" the lawyer asked gently. Piper dabbed her perfectly dry eyes with a tissue. "Yes," she sniffled, her voice shaking with fake emotion. "He knew. I told him the truth from the very beginning, but he became completely obsessed with Mila. He used his position at the county DNA lab to run illegal, unauthorized tests on us. He's deeply unstable. He frightens me every day. I just want my daughter to be safe from his delusions." My court-appointed public defender, a tired guy who looked like he hadn't slept since 1998, barely mumbled an objection. The judge, the older woman with severe, thick-rimmed glasses, looked down at me with open, unfiltered disgust. "Mr. Jude," the judge said, her voice echoing harshly in the large room, "the evidence presented today by the plaintiff is frankly disturbing. You are not biologically related to this child in any capacity. You have an active temporary restraining order against you for stalking. You currently have no permanent residence, living in a motel. Why are you even contesting this? You are wasting the court's time." I slowly stood up. I smoothed the lapels of my cheap, itchy navy suit. I looked the judge directly in the eye. "Because I'm her father, Your Honor," I said quietly, my voice steady and clear. "I fed her every night. I rocked her to sleep when she was sick. I paid for her medicine. Biology doesn't make a parent. Showing up does." Piper let out a loud, theatrical, mocking laugh from the witness stand. It echoed through the room. "He's not even her real father," she snapped, dropping the crying act and looking right at the judge. "He's just the creepy lab tech who ran the swab. Get this pathetic creep out of my sight. He doesn't belong in this courtroom. He doesn't belong anywhere near us." The judge banged her heavy wooden gavel to quiet the room. "Ma'am, restrain yourself on the stand," she warned. She looked back down at me, adjusting her glasses. "I have heard enough. I am prepared to issue my final ruling." The judge picked up her expensive fountain pen. Piper smiled, a vicious, triumphant smirk. Sterling leaned forward in his wooden seat, slipping his phone into his pocket, ready to stand up and celebrate his victory. And then, the heavy, brass-handled double doors at the absolute back of the courtroom swung open. They didn't just open. They violently slammed open, hitting the wooden doorstops with a sharp crack that sounded exactly like a gunshot. Everyone in the room, including the judge, jumped and turned around. 4 large men wearing dark, tactical windbreakers walked purposefully down the center aisle. The bold yellow letters printed on the back of their jackets read, FBI. Agent Rusk was leading them. He wasn't wearing his rumpled suit today. He looked sharp, focused, and incredibly dangerous. The court bailiff instinctively reached for his weapon, stepping into the aisle, but Rusk immediately held up his gold badge for his weapon. "Federal warrant," Rusk announced, his voice booming through the acoustics of the room. The judge lowered her pen, her face flushing with anger. "Excuse me? What is the meaning of this? This is a closed family court proceeding. You cannot interrupt my courtroom." "Apologies, Your Honor," Rusk said smoothly, not slowing his pace for a single second as he marched down the aisle. "But federal warrants supersede civil proceedings. We have federal arrest warrants for 3 individuals currently sitting in this room." Piper's triumphant smile vanished instantly. Sterling stood up, his face pale. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, desperately trying to project his authoritative politician voice. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm running for city council." "I know exactly who you are, Mr. Sterling," Rusk said, stopping right in front of the gallery railing. 2 heavily armed agents immediately flanked Sterling, trapping him in the pew. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back." "On what charges?" Sterling yelled, his face suddenly turning a blotchy, panicked red. "My lawyers will have your badge for this. Wire fraud, embezzlement of federal funds, tax evasion, and conspiracy to defraud a 501c3 children's charity," Rusk said calmly, reciting the list like a grocery order. As he spoke, he pulled a heavy pair of steel handcuffs from his tactical belt. Wyatt panicked. He actually tried to run. He vaulted over the wooden bench and bolted for the side exit door. An agent, twice his size, tackled him brutally into the heavy oak railing. The sickening sound of Wyatt's face hitting the wood echoed like a drum. He crumpled to the floor, groaning. Piper was still standing frozen in the raised witness box. Her hands were shaking so violently that the small lapel microphone clipped to her pristine white blazer rattled against the fabric. This is a mistake, Piper stammered, her voice high-pitched and breathless, looking frantically between Rusk, the judge, and Sterling. We haven't done anything wrong. Sterling, tell them it's a mistake. Sterling wasn't saying anything. He was currently being shoved face down onto the wooden bench by two agents, his arms painfully twisted behind his back, the cuffs clicking shut over his expensive watch. Agent Rusk walked past the defense tables and stepped right up to the witness stand. He looked up at Piper. "Piper Vance?" he asked, his voice deadpan. "Yes, but I don't—" "You're under arrest for federal conspiracy and money laundering in relation to $456,000 in stolen state grants," Rusk said. He didn't wait for her to process it. He reached up, grabbed her by the arm of her white blazer, pulled her roughly out of the witness box, and spun her around. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheting tight around Piper's wrists was the most beautiful, symphonic sound I have ever heard in my entire life. "Wait!" Piper screamed, struggling against Rusk's grip. Her pristine blazer was getting crumpled and ruined. "I don't know anything about any money. It was Wyatt. It was Sterling. I'm just an office manager. I just answer the phones." "That's funny," Rusk said smoothly, leaning in close to her. "Because we have a heavily encrypted solid-state drive containing shadow ledgers authored by you. Specifically, a folder labeled P_S_draws. That's a whole lot of complex offshore accounting for a simple office manager." Piper froze completely. Her eyes went incredibly wide, the whites showing all the way around her irises. Her breathing stopped. She slowly, mechanically turned her head and looked across the courtroom at me. I was standing at the defendant's table. I hadn't moved an inch. I was just watching her. "You," she whispered. The horrifying realization hit her like a physical blow to the stomach. All the blood drained from her face until she looked like a corpse. "The box in the driveway. You took the drive." "I told you I was going to burn your house to the ground, Piper," I said softly, my voice carrying perfectly in the silent room. "You set me up," she suddenly shrieked, thrashing wildly against the federal agents holding her arms. "He set me up. He's crazy. He's a stalker. He's trying to steal my child." "Let's go," Rusk said firmly, dragging her toward the center aisle. As they pulled her forcefully past my table, she dug the heels of her expensive shoes into the carpet, fighting them every step of the way. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated, venomous hatred. "You're dead!" she spat, thick tears of genuine, terrified panic finally streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "Do you hear me? You're absolutely nothing. You're a fake father and a pathetic loser." I looked at her. I didn't yell back. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. I just leaned forward slightly over the table and delivered my final 10 words to her. "I'm the lab tech who just processed your prison sentence." I turned my back to her and sat down in my chair. They dragged her out the double doors. I could hear her hysterical screaming echoing all the way down the marble hallway. I could hear Sterling shouting desperately about calling his lawyers. I could hear Wyatt cursing in pain. And then the heavy doors swung shut. Silence fell over the courtroom. A thick, heavy silence. The judge was staring blankly at the empty center aisle, her mouth hanging slightly open in shock. She slowly turned her gaze to me. "Mr. Jude," the judge said, her voice entirely different now. The disgust was gone. It was softer, extremely cautious. "Did you intentionally orchestrate a federal FBI raid in the exact middle of my custody hearing?" "I merely provided digital evidence of a federal crime to the proper authorities, Your Honor," I said politely, folding my hands on the table. The specific timing of their arrest warrant execution was entirely up to the Bureau. The judge looked down at the massive stack of paperwork on her desk. She looked at the forged birth certificate. She looked at the restraining order. She looked at me, sitting calmly in my cheap suit. "Given that the plaintiff and her immediate family are now in federal custody facing serious felony charges," the judge said slowly, choosing her words very carefully, And given that the biological mother abandoned the child 4 years ago, the state of Iowa is inclined to view you as the primary psychological and de facto parent. The temporary restraining order is dissolved. Temporary sole physical and legal custody is immediately awarded to the defendant. Case adjourned. She slammed the gavel down. The sound rang like a bell of freedom. I walked out of the courtroom. The air in the hallway felt lighter. The social worker was standing nervously by the water fountain. Mila was sitting on a wooden bench, swinging her little legs, the blue dinosaur backpack sitting right next to her. She looked up. Her eyes lit up like fireworks. "Daddy!" she yelled at the top of her lungs. She jumped off the bench and ran toward me as fast as she could. I dropped to my knees on the cold, hard marble floor. She crashed into my chest, wrapping her tiny, warm arms tightly around my neck. She smelled like sweet strawberry shampoo and graham crackers. I buried my face in her shoulder, holding her so tight I thought I might break her. And for the first time in 4 agonizing years, I finally let myself cry. The immediate aftermath was an absolute, devastating bloodbath for them. Within 2 weeks, the local news broke the massive story. City council candidate arrested in $500,000 charity fraud scheme. Sterling's arrogant face was plastered across every television screen and newspaper in Des Moines. His promising political career evaporated overnight. His wealthy, connected friends completely abandoned him to distance themselves from the scandal. His massive bank accounts and assets were instantly frozen by the federal government, which meant he couldn't afford his high-priced defense attorneys. He ended up sitting at the defense table with an overworked public defender. Wyatt folded immediately. He was a coward. He lasted exactly 3 days in the county lockup before he completely flipped on Sterling and Piper, crying to the feds and offering to testify against his own sister in exchange for a reduced sentence. Piper tried desperately to play the victim card one last time. She cried on the stand during her federal trial. She claimed Sterling emotionally manipulated and forced her to keep the shadow ledgers. But the feds had recovered her deleted text messages. They had her digital signature on every single offshore wire transfer. They had undeniable proof she had personally used the stolen charity money to buy designer clothes, expensive vacations, and put a massive down payment on a luxury condo she was secretly planning to move into with Sterling once they successfully kicked me out. The federal judge showed no mercy. Piper was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. Sterling got 8 years. Wyatt got 3. The enablers fell too. The corrupt, gambling-addicted doctor who forged the birth certificate was heavily investigated by the state medical board, permanently stripped of his medical license, and federally charged with conspiracy and fraud. About a month after Piper officially went to prison, I got a standard white envelope in the mail. It had a federal penitentiary return address stamped in the corner. I didn't even open it. I knew exactly what it was. It was Piper. She was probably begging, probably trying to manipulate me one last time, probably using Mila's name as a desperate guilt trip to get me to put money on her commissary account. I took the envelope, walked into the kitchen, and dropped it directly into the trash can. I poured my morning coffee. I have my own apartment now. It's not a big, fancy house by the river. It's a modest, quiet 3-bedroom place on the east side of Des Moines. But it's incredibly warm. It's safe. And my name is the only one on the lease. I still work at the county DNA lab. I still put on the crinkling blue paper gown, the latex gloves, and run the massive machines. I still like the quiet. A few weeks ago, the final adoption papers officially cleared the court system. The state of Iowa legally recognized what my heart had known since the exact day I cut the umbilical cord in that freezing hospital room. Mila is my daughter, legally, permanently, and irrevocably. This morning, I woke up at 6 a.m. The winter sun was just starting to peek over the snow-covered roofs of the neighborhood, casting a warm, golden light through the blinds. The coffee pot was hissing and gurgling on the counter, filling the apartment with the smell of dark roast. I walked quietly into Mila's room. She was fast asleep, tangled up in her pink princess blankets, her chest rising and falling in a slow, peaceful rhythm. I sat gently on the edge of the mattress and carefully brushed a stray lock of hair out of her face. She mumbled something in her sleep and smiled. My foster dad Arthur was absolutely right. A liar builds a tall house. They build it incredibly fast, and they build it with stolen materials, and they sit on the balcony looking down on everyone else from the top floor, thinking they are untouchable gods. But a patient man owns the matches. And when the house finally, inevitably burns down to the ground, the patient man is the only one left standing in the smoking ashes, holding the only thing that actually mattered in the first place. I kissed Mila softly on the forehead, walked back into the warm kitchen, and started making pancake batter. I poured the batter into the hot skillet, shaping them into little ducks, because that's what dads do.